Good day, dear listener. Pull up a comfortable chair, pour yourself a cup of Earl Grey, and settle in for a gentle puzzle in the heart of St. Mary Mead. I'm your guide through the lanes and cottages of this sleepy English village, where nothing is ever quite as it seems, except perhaps the scones at the Blue Boar. You are about to join Miss Jane Marple, that unassuming spinster with eyes like a hawk and a mind sharper than a hatpin, as she unravels Chapter 1. The Sapphire That Wasn't There. The village of St. Mary Mead lay dozing under a pale October sun in the year 1952, its thatched roofs glowing like warm loaves fresh from the oven. Smoke curled lazily from cottage chimneys carrying the scent of applewood and damp leaves. Along the high street, the butcher's boy whistled as he pedaled his bicycle. The postman tipped his cap to Miss Hartnell outside the post office, and old Mr. Swetnam dozed on a bench beneath the war memorial, his pipe gone cold in his hand. At the far end of the village, beyond the lich gate and the yew-shaded churchyard, stood Gossington Hall, a rambling red-brick mansion built in the reign of Queen Anne, with tall chimneys and a portico that had once welcomed carriages but now sheltered only the Colonel's ancient Austin. The hall had not truly belonged to Colonel and Mrs. Bantry for years. They rented it from the estate of the late Mrs. Gossington, whose portrait still glowered down from the staircase in a gown of puce silk and an expression of perpetual disapproval. The furniture was mostly theirs, the silver theirs, but the family jewels, those had remained with the house, locked in a squat iron safe behind a tapestry of hunting scenes in the drawing room. On this particular Tuesday, the drawing room hummed with the clink of teacups and the rustle of bombazine. Mrs. Bantry Dolly, to her friends, though few dared use the name, had invited the usual circle for afternoon tea. Mrs. Price Ridley, whose tongue was sharper than her hat pins. Miss Hartnell, who organized everything from the Harvest Festival to the Mothers' Union. The vicar's young wife, Griselda, all golden curls and nervous laughter. And Miss Jane Marple, seated demurely by the fireplace with her knitting, her silver hair neatly coiled beneath a lace cap, her pale blue eyes apparently fixed on the pattern of her shawl. But Miss Marple was never truly fixed on anything so trivial as wool. She observed, she listened, and she remembered. Mrs. Bantry's voice rose above the murmur like a trumpet. "It's gone, Dolly, the Gossington sapphire, vanished from its velvet case between luncheon and tea." Colonel Bantry, red-faced and walrus-mustached, tugged at his tie as though it were a noose. "Dash it all, woman, are you certain you didn't mislay it? You're always leaving things about, spectacles, gloves, that infernal dog's lead." Mislay a brooch the size of a walnut? Mrs. Bantry's bosom quivered with indignation. "Arthur, it was in the safe this morning. I opened it myself to show Mrs. Price Ridley. You were there. You saw it." Mrs. Price Ridley, a thin woman with a nose like a hatchet, nodded vigorously. "Indeed I did. A magnificent stone, deep cornflower blue, flawless, set in a circle of tiny diamonds. 18th century work, I shouldn't wonder. I said at the time, Dolly, you must take care. Such a piece is a temptation." "And I did take care," Mrs. Bantry cried. "I locked the safe myself at 1:30 after luncheon. Tomlinson was in the pantry. He saw me. And then I went upstairs to change for the Women's Institute meeting. I came down at 4 o'clock for tea, opened the safe to show Griselda, and it was gone." The room fell silent, save for the ticking of the ormolu clock on the mantelpiece and the soft click of Miss Marple's knitting needles. Click, 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 each stitch a thought, each thought a possibility. Colonel Bantry cleared his throat. Now, let's not get carried away. Probably just slipped behind something. These old safes have false bottoms, don't they?" Mrs. Bantry marched to the tapestry, a faded scene of hounds and huntsmen, and flung it aside with a violence that made Miss Hartnell gasp. The safe, A squat iron box with a brass dial yawned open. Inside lay a silver snuff-box, a pearl teapot, a bundle of yellowed letters tied with faded ribbon, and an empty velvet indentation shaped like a teardrop. "There!" Mrs. Bantry pointed triumphantly. "You see? Empty!" Miss Marple laid her knitting aside and rose with the gentle dignity of a duchess. "May I, Dolly dear?" Mrs. Bantry stepped back, still quivering. Miss Marple approached the safe, her small gloved hands hovering like moths. She peered inside, then ran a finger along the velvet. A faint dusting of powder, face powder perhaps, or talcum, clung to the indentation. "Opened recently," she murmured, "and closed again in haste. See how the velvet is crushed." Colonel Bantry snorted. "Anyone could have opened it. Key hangs in the pantry, doesn't it? Tomlinson, dash it, where's the man?" Tomlinson, the butler, appeared in the doorway as though summoned by telepathy. He was a tall, stooped figure with the mournful expression of a bloodhound who has lost the scent. His hands, Miss Marple noted, trembled slightly as he balanced a silver tray of scones. "You rang, sir?" "The key, Tomlinson," the colonel barked. "Who's had access to the pantry since luncheon?" Tomlinson's Adam's apple bobbed. "No one, sir. That is, cook was in and out, and the daily girl, Elsie. And Miss Griselda came for a recipe book at 2:30. And Mr. Raymond, Miss Marple's nephew, sir, he asked for a stamp at 3:00. But the key never left its hook, sir, I'd swear to it." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. 5 people in the pantry, she thought. And how many more who passed through the hall? Griselda, perched on the edge of a chintz sofa, twisted a handkerchief in her lap. "I only wanted the recipe for lemon curd," she said, her voice high and childish. "Mrs. Bantry said I might borrow her book. I never touched the safe. I wouldn't know how." Mrs. Price Ridley sniffed. "Young wives these days, always wanting recipes. In my day, we made do with what we had." The vicar's wife flushed crimson. Miss Marple patted her hand. "No one is accusing you, my dear, but memory is a tricky thing. Perhaps you noticed something unusual?" Griselda shook her head, curls bouncing. Only that the tapestry was crooked when I came downstairs. I straightened it. I hope that was all right." Mrs. Bantry gasped. "The tapestry! Arthur, you oaf, you must have knocked it when you were looking for your pipe." The colonel bristled. "I haven't been near the blasted thing since breakfast." Miss Marple returned to her chair, picking up her knitting once more. Click, click, click. The rhythm soothed her, like the ticking of a clock or the turning of pages in a well-loved book. She reviewed the facts. And, she thought, Mrs. Bantry's wristwatch is 3 minutes fast. I noticed it yesterday when the church clock struck noon. She glanced at the ormolu clock. It read 4:17. The church clock, audible through the open window, chimed the quarter hour, 4:15. So the theft occurred between 1:27 and 3:57 village time. Mrs. Bantry was still railing. "We must call the police, Inspector Slack. He'll know what to do. Though he's as much use as a chocolate teapot." Miss Hartnell bristled. "Now, Dolly, the police must be informed. A jewel of that value." "Value?" Colonel Bantry snorted. "It's been in the family since Napoleon, but it's only a sapphire, not the crown jewels." Miss Marple spoke for the first time, her voice soft but carrying. "Sapphires are curious stones, Colonel. They catch the light in such a way that one can almost believe they have a life of their own. I remember a case in my youth, a brooch very like this one. It disappeared from a locked drawer, and the culprit was the last person anyone suspected." The room stilled. Mrs. Price Ridley leaned forward. "Who was it, Miss Marple?" Miss Marple smiled. "The lady's maid, who had a duplicate key made from wax. But that was in Torquay, and this is St. Mary Mead. Here we are more domestic in our mysteries." Griselda giggled nervously. "You make it sound like a game." "Life is a game, my dear," Miss Marple said, "and the pieces are people. Now, Dolly, perhaps we might have a fresh pot of tea. And Tomlinson, if you would be so kind as to fetch the key from the pantry, I should like to examine it." Tomlinson hesitated, then bowed and departed. Mrs. Bantry rang for fresh tea. The conversation turned to safer topics: the harvest festival, the price of coal, the vicar's sermon on temperance. But Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. She recalled the sapphire from previous visits. Mrs. Bantry had worn it only twice, to the Hunt Ball in 1948 and to the Duchess of Malfi's garden party in 1950. Both times it had gleamed against black velvet with a depth that seemed almost unnatural. Too perfect, Miss Marple thought, like a stage prop. Tomlinson returned with the key, a heavy brass object with a bow shaped like a clover leaf. Miss Marple turned it over in her hands. A tiny scratch marred the bow, fresh and bright. She compared it to the lock on the safe. Another scratch, identical. "Used recently," she said aloud, "and with some force. See how the metal is bright where the scratch begins?" Colonel Bantry peered over her shoulder. "By Jove, you're right, but anyone could have—" "Anyone who knew the combination," Mrs. Bantry interrupted. "It's 1895, the year the hall was built. I never changed it. Too much bother." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. So the lock was not the obstacle, only the key and the opportunity. Outside, the October light faded to lavender. The church clock struck 5. Miss Marple gathered her knitting and rose. "I must be getting home," she said. "My maid Clara will be wondering. But Dolly, if I might make a suggestion, do not call Inspector Slack just yet. Give the village a day or two to settle. Mysteries, like puddings, sometimes need time to set." Mrs. Bantry looked doubtful but nodded. "If you say so, Jane. Though I shan't sleep a wink," Miss Marple smiled. "You will, my dear, you always do." As she walked down the gravel drive, the wind rustled the beech leaves overhead. Miss Marple paused beneath the portico, glancing back at the drawing-room windows. 5 silhouettes moved against the lamplight. Mrs. Bantry wringing her hands, the Colonel pacing, Griselda twisting her handkerchief, Mrs. Price Ridley gesturing sharply, Miss Hartnell nodding solemnly. And in the shadows of the hall, Tomlinson stood motionless, watching. Miss Marple pulled her shawl closer. Human nature, she reflected, was like the village itself, apparently sleepy, but full of hidden currents. Somewhere in St. Mary Mead, a thief was congratulating themselves on a clever stroke. But cleverness, like sapphires, could be deceptive. Chapter 2. 5 Pairs of Eyes. The following evening, the vicarage garden glowed with the soft amber of Chinese lanterns strung between the apple trees. It was the first meeting of the Harvest Festival Committee, an occasion as fixed in St. Mary Mead's calendar as the equinox itself. Tables draped in starched linen groaned beneath blackberry jam, Victoria sponges and the vicar's homemade elderflower cordial, which had a reputation for inducing either euphoria or instant slumber, depending on the vintage. Miss Jane Marple arrived precisely at 7, her gray kid gloves spotless, her lace cap pinned with mathematical precision. She carried a small wicker basket containing her contribution, a dozen jars of damson jelly, each labeled in her neat copper plate. Clara, her maid, had protested that the walk was too far for a lady of her years. But Miss Marple had merely smiled. Exercise, she believed, was as necessary to the mind as to the body. The garden hummed with village life. Mrs. Price Ridley, resplendent in puce bombazine and a hat adorned with a stuffed kingfisher, was already holding court beside the marrow competition. Miss Hartnell, clipboard in hand, marshaled the flower-arranging rota with military zeal. The vicar, Leonard Clement, drifted among his flock like a benevolent heron, murmuring blessings and surreptitiously sampling the cordial. His wife, Griselda, flitted from group to group in a frock of palest lemon, her laughter bright as the lanterns. But Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere. She had come to observe her 5 suspects, 5 pairs of eyes that had, in one way or another, rested upon the Gossington sapphire within the crucial hours of its disappearance. She settled herself on a rustic bench beneath the mulberry tree, opened her basket and arranged her jars with deliberate care. From this vantage point she commanded a clear view of the garden while appearing merely a kindly old lady admiring the dahlias. Click, click, click. Her knitting needles began their quiet rhythm. Letitia Blacklock stood apart from the throng, fanning herself with the Harvest Festival program. She was Colonel Bantry's cousin, newly returned from 20 years in India, where her husband had managed a tea plantation until his unfortunate encounter with a tiger. Now a widow of independent means, she had taken the dower house at the edge of the village, a pretty ivy-clad cottage with a garden full of exotic plants that made Mr. Swettenham mutter about foreign weeds. Letitia was tall, angular, with a hawk-like nose and eyes the color of gunmetal. She wore a gown of heavy silk, the shade of ripe aubergines, and around her neck hung a pendant of cashmere sapphires, smaller than the Gossington stone but unmistakably genuine. Miss Marple noted the way Letitia's fingers strayed to the pendant whenever the conversation turned to jewels. "Such a pity," Letitia was saying to Mrs. Price Ridley, her voice carrying the clipped vowels of the Raj. "Family heirlooms should remain in the family. To think of that magnificent sapphire in the hands of, well, one hesitates to say thieves, but—" Mrs. Price Ridley bristled. "Indeed. Though I always said Dolly Bantry was careless, leaving the key in the pantry like a common tradesman." Letitia's lips curved in a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Carelessness is a luxury one cannot afford when one has known uncertainty." Miss Marple's needles paused. Uncertainty, she thought. A word that covers a multitude of sins. Letitia Blacklock had returned to England with trunks of curios and, rumor said, debts. Sapphires, real or paste, might ease such burdens. Miss Marple's nephew Raymond arrived late, as was his habit, striding across the lawn in a velvet jacket the color of damson jam. He was a novelist of moderate success, currently researching a book on the criminal impulse in rural society. His presence in St. Mary Mead was ostensibly to visit his aunt, but Miss Marple suspected the sapphire had provided irresistible local color. Raymond carried a leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen that leaked alarmingly. He greeted the assembly with a theatrical bow. "Evening, all. I hear we've a mystery to rival Wilkie Collins. Aunt Jane, you must tell me everything." Miss Marple regarded him mildly. "Everything, Raymond, is a great deal to ask. Begin with the scones. They are excellent." He laughed, but his eyes were already roving the garden, cataloguing faces. Yesterday in the Gossington library he had sketched the sapphire in meticulous detail, facet by facet, claw by claw. Miss Marple had seen the drawing, the stone rendered with a precision that suggested more than artistic interest. "Tell me," Raymond said now, leaning against the mulberry tree, "who had access to the safe? The butler, obviously, the vicar's wife, sorry, Griselda, no offense, and that cousin from India. Motives galore." "Motive," Miss Marple corrected gently, "is not the same as opportunity, nor is opportunity the same as character." Raymond grinned. "Character, that's the stuff. I'm thinking of a short story, The Brooch That Walked. The thief leaves no trace but a single sapphire petal on the carpet. Symbolism, you see." Miss Marple resumed her knitting. Symbolism, she thought, is all very well in fiction. In life, thieves leave muddy footprints and torn handkerchiefs. Griselda approached with a plate of fairy cakes, her cheeks flushed from the cordial. She was 25, married to a man 20 years her senior, and still possessed the enthusiasm of a schoolgirl. Her frock was too young for her curls too artful, but there was no malice in her, only a desperate desire to be admired. "Miss Marple, do try one. Cook let me ice them myself." Miss Marple accepted a cake with grave courtesy. "You have a light hand with almond essence, my dear. Tell me, were you in the pantry yesterday for the lemon curd recipe?" Griselda's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "Yes, just after luncheon. Mrs. Bantry said I might borrow her book, but I never touched the safe. I wouldn't dream of it." Her voice rose to a squeak. Several heads turned. Miss Marple patted the bench beside her. "Sit, child, no one is accusing you, but memory is a curious thing. Did you notice anything unusual? A door ajar, perhaps? A shadow in the hall?" Griselda bit her lip. Only that the tapestry was crooked. I straightened it. And there was a smell, violets, I think, like the scarf Mrs. Blacklock wears." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. Letitia Blacklock's scarf was lilac, not violet. But Griselda's nose was keen. She had once identified a faulty batch of scones by a trace of rancid butter. "And your eyes," Miss Marple continued, "are hazel, are they not? Yet you told Mrs. Price Ridley that sapphires matched them." Griselda laughed a trifle too loudly. "Oh, that was just silly talk. I adore sapphires. They're so romantic." She fluttered away to offer cakes to the vicar, leaving a faint scent of lily of the valley in her wake. Miss Marple made a mental note. Romance is a powerful motive when pin money is short. Tomlinson circulated with a silver tray of sherry glasses, his stoop more pronounced than usual. 20 years in service had left him with the dignity of a duke and the rheumatism of a navvy. His hands, Miss Marple observed, trembled as he offered her a glass. "No sherry, thank you, Tomlinson, but tell me, how is your sister? I heard she was unwell." The butler's face crumpled. "Not well, miss. The doctor says bath for the waters, but the railway fare alone." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I locked the safe at noon, miss, on my oath. But the key, anyone might have taken it. Cook was in the scullery, Elsie polishing the brasses. I stepped out for a moment, only to fetch the colonel's cigars." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "A moment is all a thief needs, Tomlinson. But honesty is a rare virtue. I believe you." He bowed, relief flickering across his features. Yet Miss Marple noted the fresh scratch on his cuff. A brass key might leave such a mark. Johnny arrived last, cycling up the gravel path with a squeal of brakes that made Miss Hartnell clutch her clipboard. He was 19, home from Oxford for the long vacation, with a tie the color of a signal flag and a grin that suggested the world owed him a living. "Evening all. Heard about the Sapphire. Jolly bad show. Aunt Dolly in a state, I expect?" Mrs. Price Ridley bore down upon him like a ship under full sail. "John, where have you been? You were to help with the marquee." "Sorry, Aunt. Had to pop to Much Benham, friend's birthday. Took the 3:15 bus." Miss Marple's needles stilled. The 3:15 bus arrived in the village at 3:07 according to the timetable she had memorized. If Johnny had taken it from St. Mary Mead, he could not have reached Much Benham before 3:45. Yet he claimed to have been there by 3. She watched as Johnny accepted a glass of cordial, downed it in one gulp, and helped himself to another. His eyes, bright, reckless, darted toward the dower house where Letitia Blacklock stood alone beneath the lanterns. The lanterns flickered. The vicar called for a vote on the marrow competition. Miss Marple gathered her basket and rose. "Such a pleasant evening," she murmured to Griselda. "One quite forgets the darker side of human nature." Griselda shivered, though the night was mild. "Do you think the thief is here, Miss Marple, among us?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. My dear, in a village everyone is among us. That is what makes the puzzle so delightfully intimate. She walked home beneath a sky pricked with stars, her mind turning over the 5 pairs of eyes like stones in a tumbler. Somewhere in St. Mary Mead, one of those pairs had looked upon the sapphire with more than admiration, and Miss Marple intended to discover which. Chapter 3. Footprints in the Marigolds. The next morning, Thursday, dawned with a crispness that made the village roof sparkle like sugar icing. A light frost silvered the churchyard grass, and the milkman's horse blew white clouds into the air as it clopped along the high street. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a camel-hair coat and a woolen scarf the color of heather, set out on her constitutional at precisely 8:20. She carried a small string bag containing a trowel, secateurs, and a packet of lettuce seeds. An excuse, should anyone inquire, for lingering in the gardens of Gossington Hall. Clara had protested, as always. "You'll catch your death, miss, poking about in the damp." But Miss Marple merely smiled. Damp, she had found, was excellent for preserving footprints. The hall's kitchen garden lay behind a high yew hedge, its gate perpetually ajar since the under-gardener had been called up in 1941 and never adequately replaced. Miss Marple slipped through, her sensible brogues making no sound on the gravel. The air smelled of leaf mold and wood smoke. Somewhere a robin trilled. She paused beneath the pergola where late roses still clung in defiant crimson and surveyed the scene. The drawing-room French windows opened directly onto a flagged terrace. Beyond the terrace lay the flower border, Michaelmas daisies, chrysanthemums, and a regiment of marigolds glowing like small suns. From the windows to the potting shed ran a narrow path of crazy paving, its cracks filled with moss and the occasional defiant dandelion. Dew still clung to the leaves, undisturbed except in one place. There in the soft earth of the marigold bed was a single set of footprints. Small, neat, heeled. A lady's shoe, size 5, Miss Marple judged, with a narrow instep and a slight wear on the outer edge. Someone who walked with a graceful, almost mincing step. The prints began at the French windows, crossed the path, and disappeared into the potting shed. None returned. Miss Marple knelt, heedless of her coat, and examined the nearest print. The soil was loamy, rich with compost, the impression crisp. She laid her gloved hand beside it for scale. Her own foot in a sturdy walking shoe was half a size larger. She took a leaf from her pocket, an envelope actually, addressed to Miss J. Marple, Danemead Cottage, and carefully traced the outline of the heel. Then, with the delicacy of an archaeologist, she lifted a pinch of soil. It smelled faintly of violets. "Curious," she murmured. "Not Griselda's, lily of the valley, nor Letitia's attar of roses. Violet water. Old-fashioned, inexpensive, and much favored by a certain class of person." She rose, brushing soil from her knees, and followed the prints to the potting shed. The door stood ajar. Inside, the air was warm and earthy, scented with geraniums and the sharp tang of tomato vines. Seed trays lined the benches, a watering can stood in the corner, and on a nail by the door hung a gardener's apron, its pocket bulging with twine and labels. Something glinted on the floor, a scrap of silk, violet, caught on a protruding nail. Miss Marple retrieved it with tweezers fashioned from a hairpin. The silk was fine, almost gossamer, torn in a jagged line. She held it to the light. A monogram worked in darker thread, L.B. Letitia Blacklock, or so it appeared. Miss Marple tucked the scrap into her envelope alongside the footprint tracing. She had seen Letitia's scarves, heavy silk, hand-painted, brought from Srinagar. This fragment was lighter, machine-woven, the sort sold for 6 pence a yard in the drapers in Much Benham. She stepped outside again. The footprints ended at the shed door, but a second set, larger, broader, the tread of a man's brogue. began there and led toward the compost heap. These prints were deeper, as though the walker carried weight. Miss Marple followed them. At the heap, the soil was disturbed. A shallow depression suggested something had been buried and then unearthed. She probed with her trowel. Nothing but a discarded cabbage stalk and a broken flower pot. A diversion, she said aloud, or a retrieval. From the terrace came the sound of voices, Colonel Bantry booming as ever and Tomlinson's mournful baritone. Miss Marple retreated behind a clump of raspberry canes and listened. "Told the police nothing, Tomlinson. Slack's a fool, but he'll sniff about. Best keep your wits sharp." "Yes, sir. Only the key, sir. It's back on its hook, but I found it on the pantry floor this morning, as though someone dropped it in haste." Miss Marple's ears pricked. The key returned, but not replaced with care. She waited until the voices faded, then emerged and made her way to the terrace. The French windows stood open. Inside, the drawing room was empty save for the faint scent of toast and the ormolu clock ticking toward 9. She examined the window frame. No scratches, no mud. But on the sill lay a single petal, a marigold, bright orange, its stem freshly snapped. Someone had carried it from the border and left it here, perhaps absent-mindedly. Miss Marple pocketed the petal. Her next stop was the pantry. She entered through the baize door, moving with the silent assurance of one who has known servants' halls since childhood. The key hung on its hook exactly as Tomlinson described. She lifted it down. The brass was warm from the stove, the scratch on the bow gleamed. But now there was a second mark, a tiny nick on the shaft, as though it had struck stone. Miss Marple compared it to the lock on the safe. The nick aligned perfectly with a chip in the iron plate. She nodded. The key had been used after the theft, perhaps to lock the safe again, perhaps to open it a second time. Cook bustled in, flour on her apron. "Miss Marple, whatever are you doing?" "Admiring your copper pans, Mrs. Bower, so beautifully polished." Miss Marple replaced the key. "Tell me, did anyone pass through here yesterday afternoon? After luncheon, say?" Cook wiped her hands. "Only the usual, miss. Elsie with the brasses, Griselda for her recipe, Mr. Raymond for a stamp. And young Johnny Price Ridley came tearing through at 3:20 asking for a glass of water. Said he'd missed the bus and was walking to Much Benham. Mud on his shoes, too. Tracked it all over my clean floor." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Johnny had claimed the 3:15 bus. Yet here was proof he had been in the house at 3:20. Mud from the garden path, perhaps. She thanked Cook and departed, her mind a whirl of timetables and footprints. Her final call was the post office, where Miss Hartnell was buying stamps and dispensing wisdom in equal measure. "Griselda was in yesterday," Miss Hartnell said without prompting. "Buying violet note paper, said it was for thank-you letters. Though why a vicar's wife needs scented stationery." Miss Marple purchased a postal order and inquired casually, "And Mrs. Blacklock, does she favor violet too?" "Letitia? Heavens no. She buys plain cream laid, very superior. Though I did sell a yard of violet silk ribbon to young Elsie last week, said it was for her mother's hat." Chapter 4. The locked room. That wasn't Friday morning brought a drizzle fine as lace, the sort that soaks through wool without announcement. Miss Marple, armed with a large golfing umbrella and the paste brooch in her handbag, set off for Gossington Hall at 10 sharp. She had telephoned ahead. Mrs. Bantry, still fluttering like a distressed hen, had begged her to do something. Tomlinson admitted her with the air of a man expecting bad news. The drawing room smelled of damp dogs and yesterday's panic. The safe stood open, its velvet hollow more reproachful than ever. "Inspector Slack arrives at 11, Mrs. Bantry announced. "He'll bully us all and find nothing." Jane, you must look again. Miss Marple obliged. She examined the safe from every angle, then the key in the pantry, then the French windows. Nothing new, except the marigold petal on the sill had vanished, swept away by an overzealous housemaid. Colonel Bantry stomped in, pipe belching. "Whole thing's a storm in a teacup. Brooch'll turn up in Dolly's jewel box, mark my words." "Arthur, it was paste," Mrs. Bantry wailed. "Griselda found the imitation in the garden. Someone swapped them." The colonel blinked. "Paste? But the real one's worth—" "Nothing," Miss Marple said quietly. "The real sapphire was sold in 1938 to pay death duties. Check the estate ledger, page 47. This theft was of a 5-pound trinket." Silence fell. Outside, a motorbike backfired. Inspector Slack had arrived early. Slack was a large man with the manners of a bulldog and the imagination of a sweet pudding. He strode in, helmet under arm, notebook at the ready. "Right, safe locked at 1:30, opened at 4, calm, brooch gone. Key in pantry, combination known to all. Classic inside job." He glared at Tomlinson. "You locked it?" "Yes, sir. At noon, after Mrs. Bantry showed the stone to Mrs. Price Ridley." Slack turned to Mrs. Bantry. "Who knew the combination?" "Everyone who's ever stayed here," she said helplessly. "It's 1895, the year the hall was built. I never changed it." Miss Marple coughed. "Inspector, the safe was opened twice. Once to remove the brooch, once to return the key carelessly. The second scratch on the key aligns with a chip made after the theft." Slack scowled. "Meaning?" "Meaning the thief needed the safe open again. Perhaps to plant the paste copy or to search for something else." She produced the paste brooch. Slack took it, sniffed, and handed it back. "Cheap rubbish. Why steal rubbish?" "Because the thief believed it valuable," Miss Marple said, "or wished others to believe the loss tragic." Slack interviewed the household in the library. Miss Marple listened from the morning room door ajar. Tomlinson, trembling hands, sister's illness, locked safe at noon. Griselda, lemon curd recipe, straightened tapestry, violet notepaper. Raymond, stamp at 3 on sketching in library, literary interest. Johnny, missed 3:15 bus, walked to much Benham, muddy shoes. Letitia Blacklock, admired sapphire, debts in India, violet scent. Slack emerged, triumphant. Clear as day. Butler's sister needs money, pinches brooch, panics, plants fake. Case closed. Miss Marple followed him to the hall. "Inspector, the footprints in the marigolds were size 5, heeled. Tomlinson wears 11s. And the violet silk scrap, monogrammed LB, was cheap ribbon, not Letitia's Kashmiri silk." Slack waved her away. "Red herrings. I'll have the butler in by tea." Miss Marple watched him roar off on his motorbike. Then she returned to the pantry, lifted the key, and compared it to the lock once more. The second nick was fresh, made this morning. Someone had opened the safe again while Slack questioned the staff. She examined the safe's interior. In the corner beneath the snuff box lay a single violet ribbon tied in a bow as though marking a place. She untied it. Beneath, a folded slip of paper, written in violet ink. Page 42 RW, Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Raymond's notebook, page 42, had contained the sketch of the sapphire and the note, "Paste, perfect red herring." She pocketed the ribbon and paper, then sought Mrs. Bantry in the conservatory. "Dolly, may I borrow Raymond's notebook? He left it in the library." Mrs. Bantry, distracted, waved permission. Miss Marple found the notebook on the blotter. Page 42 was torn out. She smiled. The locked room was never locked. The thief had walked in boldly, key in hand, combination known, and taken a brooch worth nothing, except to a story. Outside, the drizzle thickened. Miss Marple opened her umbrella and stepped into the garden. The marigolds drooped, heavy with rain. Somewhere in the village, a thief was congratulating themselves on a clever swap. Chapter 5. The Alibi of the 3:15. Bus Saturday broke clear and cold, the sky a hard, bright blue that made the village roofs gleam like pewter. Miss Marple, fortified by porridge and strong tea, set out at 9 with a shopping list and a purpose. The paste brooch was locked in her desk. The violet ribbon and page 42 RW slip were folded in her handbag beside a fresh notebook. She needed one more piece. Johnny Price Ridley's alibi. The bus stop stood opposite the Blue Boar, a wooden bench scarred by generations of schoolboys. A timetable, yellowed and curling, was nailed to the post. Miss Marple studied it. The 3:15 to Much Benham left daily except Sundays. Arrival 3:47, return 4:30. She memorized the numbers, then entered the post office. Miss Hartnell was behind the counter, spectacles perched on her nose. "Morning, Miss Marple. Stamps?" "A postal order, please, and tell me, did young Johnny take the 3:15 bus on Tuesday?" Miss Hartnell sniffed. "He said he did. Bought a return ticket at 3:10, but the conductor, Mr. Polk, told my sister he never saw Johnny board. Paid for the ticket, then vanished. Polk thought he'd walked." Miss Marple nodded. "And the return journey?" "Never used it. Ticket still in his pocket when he came in Wednesday for cigarettes." She purchased the order and crossed to the Blue Boar. The landlord, Mr. Stringer, was polishing glasses. "Johnny Price Ridley," Miss Marple said. "Was he here Tuesday afternoon?" Stringer scratched his chin. "Came in about 3:20, soaked through. Said he'd missed the bus and walked from the crossroads. Ordered a lemonade, left at 4. Miss Marple thanked him and walked to the bus depot behind the church. The conductor, Polk, was cleaning his cab. "Mr. Polk, Tuesday's 3:15 to Much Benham. Did Johnny Price Ridley board?" Polk spat thoughtfully. "Bought a ticket, miss. Flashy tie, loud laugh. Stood by the stop, then, poof, gone. I thought he'd changed his mind, never saw him again till Friday." Miss Marple returned home, added the times to her notebook. At 11, Griselda burst into Danemead Cottage, hat askew. "Miss Marple, Johnny's in trouble. Inspector Slack's at the hall. He says Johnny's alibi is false and the footprints match his shoes." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. "Size 11 brogues do not make size 5 heels, my dear." "But Slack found mud in Johnny's room, marigold pollen on the soles." Miss Marple fetched her coat. "Then we must see this mud." At Gossington Hall, Slack was triumphant. Johnny, pale and defiant, stood in the hall while Slack held up a brogue caked with loam. "Garden soil, pollen from the marigold border, and look," he pointed to the sole. "Size 11, but the heel's worn thin, matches the deeper prints by the compost heap." Miss Marple examined the shoe. The wear was on the inner edge. Johnny walked pigeon-toed. The garden prints had wear on the outer edge. She said nothing. Slack turned to Johnny. "You missed the bus, nipped back, stole the brooch, hid it in the marigolds, case closed." Johnny laughed bitterly. "I wish I had. I'd be in Monte Carlo by now. I missed the bus because I was arguing with Letitia Blacklock. She owes me £50 from a card game in Oxford. She paid me in the churchyard at 3:12. Ask her." Letitia, summoned, confirmed it. "Disgraceful boy, I paid in notes to avoid scandal." Slack deflated. Miss Marple smiled. "So Johnny has no alibi, but no motive either. The brooch is paste." She produced the violet ribbon. "Found in the safe this morning. Tied around a missing page, Raymond's notebook, page 42. Paste. Perfect red herring. Someone wanted us to chase a valuable theft." Raymond, lounging in the library, flushed. "Aunt Jane, that's my private fiction," Miss Marple said. "But the ribbon is Elsie's. Bought last week. She mends your socks, Raymond. She saw your note, told a friend, and the rumor spread. Someone used your red herring to cover a smaller crime. Slack scratched his head. What crime? Miss Marple opened the safe. The snuff box was gone. There, she said. The real theft. The snuff box. Silver George Theku worth 50 guineas. Taken while we chased a 5-pound brooch. The room gasped. Mrs. Bantry wailed. Slack roared for Tomlinson. Miss Marple closed the safe. The thief knew the combination, had the key and struck twice, once for the brooch, once for the snuff box. The bus alibi was a distraction, the footprints a blind. She turned to Raymond. Your page 42 gave them the idea, but who removed it? Raymond swallowed. I tore it out this morning, thought it looked bad. Miss Marple sighed. Honesty, Raymond, is the best plot twist. Outside, the church clock struck 12. The case had shifted like a kaleidoscope, one turn and the pattern changed. The sapphire was bait, the snuff box the prize, and the thief was still among them. Chapter 6. The Scarf That Wasn't Violet. Sunday afternoon in St. Mary Mead was the color of weak tea, pale sun, gray sky, and the church bells calling the faithful to evensong. Miss Marple, having taken the sacrament and declined the vicar's offer of coffee in the vestry, walked briskly to the dower house. She carried a small parcel, wrapped in brown paper. Inside lay the violet ribbon and the paste brooch. She needed Letitia Blacklock's eyes. The dower house gate squeaked. The garden was a riot of late chrysanthemums and the last stubborn roses. Letitia opened the door herself, a vision in plum velvet and a turban the shade of storm clouds. Miss Marple, do come in. Tea? Later, perhaps. First, a question. Miss Marple produced the ribbon. Yours? Letitia took it, frowning. Cheap stuff. I buy my ribbons in Bond Street. This is draper's trash. Yet it was in the safe, tied around a missing page. Letitia's eyes sharpened. Raymond's notebook? The boy's a menace, always scribbling. Miss Marple unwrapped the brooch. Letitia laughed, a short, barking sound. Paste. I could spot that at 20 paces. The real stone was sold years ago. My late husband bought it for a song in 38. Dolly never knew. Miss Marple nodded. And the snuff box? George II, hallmarked 1742, worth a packet. Someone swapped the bait. Back in the village, Miss Marple called on Griselda at the vicarage. The young wife was arranging flowers for the altar, her fingers stained green. Griselda, your violet scarf, may I see it? Griselda flushed. I don't have one, only lilac. Miss Marple produced the silk scrap from the potting shed. This was found on a nail, monogrammed L.B., but the fabric is poor. Elsie's ribbon, perhaps? Griselda's eyes widened. Elsie mends for half the village. She borrowed my embroidery silk last week, violet, to match Mrs. Blacklock's turban. Said it was for a hat. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Elsie, the daily girl, had access to the pantry, the key, the safe. She was small, size 5, with a mincing walk from tight shoes, and she had a sweetheart in Much Benham who bet on horses. At 4 o'clock, Miss Marple found Elsie in the Gossington kitchen, peeling potatoes with sullen efficiency. Elsie, your ribbon, where is it? The girl dropped the knife. I lost it, miss. In the garden Tuesday, must have snagged. And the snuff box? Elsie burst into tears. I only took the brooch, thought it was real for my Bert. But when I opened the case, it was paste. I panicked, hid it in the marigolds. Then I saw Mr. Raymond's note, perfect red herring. I thought if I took the snuff box too, they'd blame the big theft, not me. Miss Marple's voice softened. You returned the key? Yes'm, this morning while Mr. Slack was shouting. Slipped it back on the hook. And the footprints? Mine, miss. I wore your old shoes, found them in the church jumble, thought no one'd notice. Miss Marple sighed. Elsie, honesty is cheaper than prison. Return the snuff box. I'll speak to Mrs. Bantry. Elsie fetched a tin from her apron pocket. Inside, the silver snuff box, tarnished but intact. That evening, Miss Marple gathered the suspects in the Gossington drawing room. Inspector Slack loomed like a thundercloud. "The thief," Miss Marple began, "believed the brooch valuable. She took it, discovered paste, and seeing Raymond's note, stole the snuff box to create confusion. The violet ribbon was a blind, the footprints borrowed shoes." Elsie sobbed. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Bert's in debt. Bookmakers after him." Mrs. Bantry, magnanimous in victory, forgave the brooch but kept the snuff box. "Lesson learned, girl. Next time ask." Slack grumbled but closed the case. Raymond, chastened, promised to burn his notebook. Miss Marple sipped her tea. The scarf wasn't violet, the theft wasn't grand, the village was safe. Human nature, she reflected, was rarely sinister, only foolish. Chapter 7. The Sapphire's Secret. Monday morning, and the village exhaled. The harvest festival had passed without scandal. The snuff box was restored. Elsie had been sent to her aunt in Devon with a stern reference and a 10-shilling note. Yet Miss Marple sat at her parlor table, clues spread like patience cards, and felt the puzzle still breathing. The paste brooch lay center stage, its false heart winking. Around it, the violet ribbon, the torn silk scrap, the marigold petal, the bus ticket stub, the key with its twin scratches, and, newly added, Raymond's notebook. Page 42, restored by a guilty nephew who had crept in at dawn with apologies and sticking plaster. Miss Marple opened the notebook. The missing page read, "Paste sapphire, perfect red herring, swap for snuff box, blame falls on butler or youth. Story sells to Strand for $25. She closed it gently. Raymond's literary ambition had been the spark, Elsie's desperation the tinder. But the fire had burned hotter than either intended. Someone else had seen the note, used the chaos, and taken something more valuable than silver. She rang the bell. Clara entered, apron crisp. "Clara, fetch my jewel case, the small Morocco one." Clara returned with a faded box. Miss Marple unlocked it. Inside lay a brooch, sapphire, modest, set in seed pearls. On the back, engraved in flowing script, "To J.M. from A.G. 1919. "The real Gossington sapphire," Miss Marple said. "Given to me by the late Mrs. Gossington after the war. She sold the grand stone in '38, replaced it with paste, and gifted me this, her grandmother's spare. I never wore it. Sentiment, not value." Clara gasped. "So the thief took paste, thinking it real, and missed the true jewel?" "No, Clara, the thief took nothing of value from the safe. The snuff box was returned. The paste brooch was planted. Someone wanted us to believe a theft occurred." She rose, donned her coat, and walked to Gossington Hall. Mrs. Bantry greeted her with relief and seed cake. "Jane, it's over," Elsie confessed. "Slack's gone. The village is at peace." Miss Marple accepted cake, but not peace. "Dolly, may I see the estate ledger, 1938? In the library, the ledger lay dusty on a shelf. Page 47. Sapphire brooch, sold to Mr. L. Blacklock, Calcutta, 750s, replaced with paste copy, 5. Letitia Blacklock's late husband. Miss Marple's mind clicked like her needles. She sought Letitia at the dower house. The widow was pruning roses, secateurs flashing. "Letitia, your husband bought the sapphire in '38. Did he know it was to be swapped?" Letitia laid down the secateurs. "He knew everything. Paid 700 for a stone worth 2,000, thought it a bargain. When Mrs. Gossington died, he asked for the paste copy as a keepsake. Said it reminded him of her vanity. I have it still." She led Miss Marple to a cabinet. Inside, the paste brooch, identical to the one in the safe. "2 paste copies," Miss Marple murmured. "One in the safe, one here. And the real stone, mine." Letitia frowned. "Then what was stolen? Nothing?" But something was added. Miss Marple produced the violet ribbon. This was tied in the safe this morning. Someone opened it again after Elsie's confession. Letitia paled. I was in the hall yesterday returning a book. The pantry was empty. Miss Marple returned home, mind racing. She telephoned Raymond at his London club. Nephew, you're page 42. Did anyone else see it? Raymond's voice crackled. Only Griselda. She borrowed the notebook to sketch a hat, said she needed inspiration. Miss Marple hung up and walked to the vicarage. Griselda was in the garden burning leaves. Griselda, the notebook. Why did you tear out page 42? Griselda's eyes filled. I saw the note. Perfect red herring. I thought if I removed it, no one would suspect Raymond. He's writing a novel, you see. Needs the money. And the ribbon in the safe? I tied it there yesterday. Thought it would look like Elsie returned. I wanted to protect him. Miss Marple sighed. My dear, protection is not deception. The sapphire's secret is safe. With me. The theft was a comedy of errors. Elsie took paste, Letitia owned paste, you hid a page, Raymond dreamed of 25, no crime, only kindness misdirected. She gathered her clues, placed them in a box, and labeled it. For the W.I. jumble. Proceeds to Elsie's Bert. At evensong, the village sang All Things Bright and Beautiful. Miss Marple's voice was soft but clear. The sapphire's secret was hers alone, until the next mystery. Chapter 8. The confession in the potting shed Tuesday dawned with a hard frost that turned the village into a sugar-iced cake. Miss Marple, wrapped in her old squirrel coat, walked to Gossington Hall at 9:30. She carried a small tin of shortbread and a summons, delivered by hand to every suspect. Potting shed, 10 o'clock. Miss Marple requests your presence, no excuses. The shed smelled of earth and tomato vines. A single oil lamp cast golden pools on the workbench. Miss Marple stood beside a tray of seedlings, her back to the door, apparently absorbed in labeling. One by one they arrived. Miss Marple turned. Thank you for coming. We are here to bury a mystery, not dig one up. She placed the paste brooch on the bench. This is the heart of our puzzle. Worth £5, yet it caused panic, lies, and a silver snuff box to walk. Let us begin with the truth. She faced Elsie, who had slipped in quietly and now hovered by the door, apron clutched in her fists. Elsie, you took the brooch on Tuesday, believing it real. Elsie nodded, tears brimming. Yes, miss. For Bert's debts. I hid it in the marigolds, meaning to fetch it later. But when I came back Wednesday, it was gone. Miss Marple turned to Griselda. You found it Thursday morning. Griselda flushed. Yes, I thought if I discovered it, Mrs. Bantry would reward me. I buried it again deeper. Mrs. Bantry gasped. Reward? Child, I'd have given you a hat. Miss Marple lifted the snuff box. Tomlinson, you took this Friday during the commotion with Inspector Slack. Tomlinson's shoulders sagged. My sister's operation, miss. I saw the safe open, the snuff box gleaming. I thought just once to sell it quietly. But I couldn't. I returned it Saturday, hidden in the flour bin. Cook, summoned by Clara, confirmed. Found it when I baked the scones. Thought Mrs. Bantry had misplaced it. Miss Marple faced Johnny. You lied about the 3:15 bus. Johnny shrugged. Needed an alibi. I was meeting Letitia to collect £50 she owed me from cards. Didn't want Aunt Price Ridley knowing I gamble. Letitia nodded. True. Paid him in the churchyard. Disgraceful boy. Raymond cleared his throat. And I wrote the note. Paste. Perfect red herring. Thought it a clever plot. Never dreamed it would spark real thefts. Miss Marple opened her notebook. So, Elsie took the brooch, Griselda re-hid it, Tomlinson took the snuff box and returned it, Johnny lied. Raymond inspired chaos. but one piece remains. She produced her own small sapphire brooch, the real one, gifted in 1919. The true Gossington sapphire. Mrs. Gossington sold the grand stone in 1938, replaced it with paste, and gave me this. The safe held only fakes. The shed fell silent. Frost crackled on the window. Mrs. Bantry laughed until she cried. "All this for glass and sentiment," Miss Marple smiled. "Human nature, Dolly. Greed, vanity, kindness, fear, all in one small village. No villain, only villagers." She handed Elsie the tin of shortbread. "For Bert," and a reference to a draper in Much Benham. Start anew. Tomlinson received a check from the colonel, enough for his sister's operation. Griselda got a new hat. Johnny promised to avoid cards. Raymond vowed to write only truth. Letitia examined the real brooch. Exquisite, smaller but honest, like St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple closed the shed door. "The confession is complete. The heirloom is safe where it belongs, in memory." Outside, the frost began to melt. The village stirred, unaware its mystery had ended in a potting shed with shortbread and forgiveness. Chapter 9. The Revelation Over Seed. Catalogs. Wednesday, 11 o'clock, and the vicarage drawing room smelled of wood smoke, damp wool, and the vicar's best Earl Grey. Miss Marple had requested a final gathering. No police, no drama, only tea and truth. The same circle assembled. Mrs. Bantry wringing her handkerchief, Colonel Bantry polishing his monocle, Letitia Blacklock in severe navy, Raymond clutching a fresh notebook, Griselda twisting a curl, Tomlinson standing like a penitent butler, Johnny lounging against the mantel, and unexpected Elsie, apron starched, eyes red but steady. Miss Marple sat at the head of the table, seed catalogs spread before her like tarot cards. On a silver salver rested 3 brooches, the paste one from the safe, Letitia's identical paste copy, and Miss Marple's small, genuine sapphire. "We have chased a phantom," she began, voice soft but carrying. "A sapphire that vanished, reappeared, and vanished again. Let us lay the ghost." She lifted the first paste brooch. Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Elsie, believing this real, used the pantry key and the known combination, 1895, to open the safe. She took the brooch, hid it in the marigolds, and left her violet ribbon scrap as an accidental clue. Elsie nodded. "Yes, miss. For Bert." Miss Marple set it down. Thursday, Griselda found it while walking off, a headache. Fearing suspicion on Raymond, she reburied it deeper, intending to discover it later for a reward. Griselda flushed. "Silly, I know." Friday, Miss Marple continued. Tomlinson, seeing the safe open during Inspector Slack's bluster, took the snuff box for his sister's operation. He returned it Saturday, hidden in flour. Tomlinson bowed. "Guilty, ma'am, and grateful." Miss Marple lifted the second paste brooch. "Letitia owns this, bought by her husband in 1938 with the real stone, swapped for paste by Mrs. Gossington to pay debts. Letitia kept it as a memento." Letitia inclined her head. "A bargain and a vanity." Miss Marple placed her own small sapphire beside them. "The true heirloom. Gifted to me in 1919 by Mrs. Gossington herself, never in the safe, never stolen." Mrs. Bantry gasped. "All that fuss for glass?" "And silver," Miss Marple corrected. The snuff box walked twice, once out, once back. Johnny's false bus alibi shielded a debt collection from Letitia. Raymond's notebook note, perfect red herring, inspired Elsie, alarmed Griselda, and tempted Tomlinson. A comedy of errors, not a crime. She opened a seed catalog. "Observe Marigolds, page 42, Raymond's torn page." Griselda removed it to protect him. Letitia saw the notebook and recognized the paste swap from 38. No one stole value, only pride. Raymond laughed, ruefully. Aunt Jane, you've ruined my plot. Improved it, Miss Marple said, when truth is stranger and kinder. She poured tea. The revelation, the sapphire, never vanished. It lived quietly on my dressing table. The safe held a decoy swapped decades ago. Elsie took glass, Griselda hid glass, Tomlinson borrowed silver and returned it. The village chased shadows. Johnny raised his cup. To shadows, and to Aunt Jane, who sees through them. Mrs. Bantry dabbed her eyes. But the footprints, the ribbon, the key scratches. Footprints, Elsie in my jumble sale shoes. Ribbon hers, snagged in panic. Key scratches, repeated use by many hands. All explained. Miss Marple closed the catalog. The heirloom is memory. Mrs. Gossington's gift to me, her vanity to Letitia, her legend to the village. Let it rest. She distributed the brooches. Paste to Letitia, paste to the W.I. jumble, genuine to her own pocket. The snuff box returned to the safe, now locked with a new combination known only to Mrs. Bantry. Outside, the frost had melted. Rooks wheeled over the churchyard. The gathering broke into gentle chatter, plans for the Christmas bazaar, recipes, gossip softened by relief. Miss Marple slipped away, pausing in the vicarage garden. She opened her hand. The small sapphire caught the pale sun, modest but true. Human nature, she murmured, is the real jewel. Flawed but priceless. The bells rang noon. St. Mary Mead dozed once more, its mystery solved over seed catalogs and second cups. Chapter 10. Tea and Reconciliation. Thursday morning and the first pale sunshine of the week slid through the lace curtains of Gossington Hall's morning room like warm honey. The fire crackled, the kettle sang, the scent of toast and Cooper's Oxford marmalade filled the air. Mrs. Bantry had declared a celebration breakfast, no mystery, no police, only friends. The long table was set for 11. Silver teapot, rose-patterned cups, a three-tier stand groaning under scones, damson jam, clotted cream, and Miss Marple's shortbread. At the head sat Miss Marple herself, lace-cap crisp, eyes bright as a robin's. Around her, the full circle transformed by truth. Mrs. Bantry bustled in, cheeks pink. "Jane, you're a marvel. All that fuss for a bit of glass in a silver box." Colonel Bantry carved ham with military precision. "Dash it, Dolly, the silver's worth 50 guineas. But the girl's right, no harm done." Letitia Blacklock in dove-gray wool lifted her paste brooch, now pinned proudly. "My husband's bargain, I shall wear it to the W.I. vanity, but honest vanity." Raymond notebook abandoned, buttered a scone. "Aunt Jane, I'm rewriting the story, title The Brooch That Wasn't, proceeds to Elsie's Bert." Griselda in a new hat of robin's egg blue laughed. "I'll model for the cover if you promise no more red herrings." Tomlinson, restored to dignity, poured tea with steady hands. "Sister's operation booked, sir. Your check, Colonel. Words fail me." Johnny raised his cup. "To Miss Marple, and to never betting on a 3:15 bus again." Elsie, apron starched, served cream with a shy smile. "Draper's job starts Monday, miss." "Thank you." Miss Marple accepted tea, milk first, 1 sugar, and surveyed her village. The frost had melted, the puzzle had thawed. She lifted the small, genuine sapphire brooch from her pocket and pinned it to her cardigan. "The heirloom returns home," she said, "not to a safe, but to memory. Mrs. Gossington gave me this in 1919, for kindness during the war," she said. "The grand stone was sold in 38. The paste took its place. Letitia owns its twin. The safe held only echoes." Mrs. Bantry dabbed her eyes with a corner of toast. "I feel a fool, Jane. All those tears for glass." "Glass catches light," Miss Marple replied. "And light is hope. You hoped for legacy, Elsie for rescue. Griselda for admiration, Tomlinson for family, Raymond for a story. Hope is never foolish." She passed the shortbread. "Now practicalities. The W.I. Jumble receives the spare paste brooch labeled Genuine Imitation Fives. Proceeds to the church roof. The snuff box stays in the safe. New combination, 1919, the year of the gift. And Elsie keeps her reference. Letitia raised her cup. To 1919 and to friends who see through paste to truth. Clara, summoned from Danemead Cottage, brought a telegram. Bert, debt-free, stop. Draper, thrilled, stop. Elsie. The room cheered. Outside, the church clock struck 10. Rooks wheeled. A boy whistled on his bicycle. The postman tipped his cap. St. Mary Mead breathed easy. Miss Marple sipped her tea. Human nature, like marmalade, is best spread thin. Too much and it cloys, we have just enough. Mrs. Bantry leaned forward. But Jane, who really moved the snuff box the second time? Miss Marple smiled. Cook. She polished it Tuesday night, forgot, found it in the flour bin Saturday and popped it back before breakfast. She confessed this morning, over scones. The room dissolved in laughter. Even Tomlinson chuckled. Raymond lifted his cup. To Cook, and to the best plot twist of all. Miss Marple gathered her gloves. The mystery is solved. The village mended, the tea excellent. I must walk home before the sun climbs higher. At the door, Griselda hugged her. You've given us more than a brooch, Miss Marple. You've given us ourselves, flawed but forgiven. Miss Marple patted her cheek. My dear, that is the only heirloom worth keeping. She stepped into the crisp air. The sapphire caught the light, small, true, enduring. Behind her, the morning room rang with talk of Christmas bazaars, new hats, and the price of coal. Ahead, Danemead Cottage waited with Clara's seed cake and a fresh puzzle in the newspaper. Miss Marple walked slowly, savoring the village's gentle rhythm. The mystery of the vanishing heirloom was over. The mystery of human hearts, kind, foolish, brave, had only begun.